Hey, welcome to the Richey Mortgage Team Real Estate Podcast, sponsored by the Velocity Team at Click and Close Mortgage. And today, I've got part 3 with a very special guest, my dad, Gary Richey. So, Dad, I appreciate you popping back on. I know you always run around and you got a busy schedule, but it's an honor to share some time with you as a father and son. But it's more important, it's also important to share time with you as a real estate mogul and real estate historian. So thanks again for popping on.
You bet. My pleasure.
So where we left off last on the previous podcast, we were talking about your career at Keller Williams and, the BOLD program that you and Gene Frederick created to not only get agents off to a quick start, but also to help the retention of the agents that you, recruited at Keller Williams and to keep them there. But you've also done quite a bit of instructing at Champion School of Real Estate. Talk about, how long you've been doing that and kind of, what led you to doing that and why are you still doing it today?
Well, primarily, where it started off is it wasn't intentional on my part. One of my, in fact, the team leader and office manager at our Richardson office, whenever, your mom and I had that Richardson office, was a licensed instructor, and so was her mom, who was one of our brokers that helped launch that Keller Williams Richardson office. And
was that Pam Durasett?
Yes, it was Pam Durasett, and her daughter Deidre Rivera was our team leader for our initial launch and for about a year and a half, and they were both excellent instructors. And Pam started teaching for Champion School of Real Estate when they launched their initial Dallas campus in, I think, around 2000, 2001. And their initial location was over off of Preston Road and, just south of Frankfurt. So what we did is she said, I'm going to have the owner give you a call. Well, what happened is Rita Santa Maria, the owner and founder of Champions, and she came over to the office and we sat down in our conference room and we had a conversation about, the future and so forth and so on. And she said, now currently you have to have a teaching certification through the Texas Real Estate Commission. I said, well, I don't have any kind of teaching background at all. And I don't know if I could even, be really good at it. And she said, well, I've heard from several people that you teach classes inside of your own office and throughout Keller Williams, and that, you've got a very captivating voice and style, and you're funny. And I went, funny? Okay. She said, yeah, because quite honestly, you have to use a sense of humor. No one wants to go sit into a class for 6 or 8 hours and hear a dry, monotone voice, and, it's nothing interesting. And I always had a tendency to inject actual transactional without revealing any confidential information about who the client was or so forth. But I would take real transactions that had maybe unusual circumstances or anomalies and interject them into as examples of this is why you want to do this is why you want to do that. And so it made it a little bit more applicable towards real life rather than dry information off of a page.
Right.
And so I went in there and I said, okay, well, what can I teach if you have to have a certificate? And she said, well, we'll start you off with the real estate prep class, because that's not a certified class by TREC, but it's one of the more important classes we have, because it's the class that you take everything and bond it together and deliver the information for people who are getting ready to take their test, their broker's test or their sales test. And I said, okay, I'll try that and see how that works. Well, the first few times I did it, I found it really, really challenging, because we had to go through about 100 pages of information in about, 16 or 18 hours. And it was broken up over 2 days. But I found that it was very familiar to me, because most of the items that are in each one of those modules that are required by the Texas Real Estate Commission really does apply to everyday application of practice of real estate. And so I kind of took to that. I enjoyed it. And then they added me later on that year in 2001. I think I started my first class in March or April of 2001. And then I developed enough hours, enough experience, and had enough education background that they finally got me approved to teach core classes, which is Principles 1, Principles 2, all that other exciting stuff. So I did that as well. And so they added me not as a full-time licensed instructor because I still had so many other things going on with the office, and then going over to Preston Road and teaching classes there for Gene and Susan Frederick, who are our team leaders over there.
Right.
So I had a pretty active instructor's life. And so I found that, besides doing all of my other things like my construction businesses, helping your mom in her business and develop that, and, working with the office and being inside of Keller Williams, I really, really enjoyed it, and it was a great resource to recruit new talent and new agents into the real estate business.
Right.
Because I was one of their instructors, and they have a tendency, you have to develop a communication and a connection with your students in every single class. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done, depending on the personality of the class. And every class was completely unique and different. Some were a lot more, shall we say, rowdy, harder to control and maintain attention. But I found out that I kind of had a natural ability to focus everybody's attention on what was really, truly important. And so they kept me on there. I really enjoyed it a lot. And they added me to more classes and more classes. And so it got to where I was doing more instructing than I was doing anything else. But I really, really enjoyed it because it was a great resource to get to know the people before they ever got into the real estate business. And so that just was kind of a natural blend and helped me to develop both the number of agents in our office in Richardson, as well as Dallas Preston Road, as well as Keller Williams in general, because we had, at that time, 2002, 3, and 4 were great growth years for the Keller Williams brand name. And we had market centers all over the Metroplex, and Champions attracted students from all over North Texas. So there was, sitting in the prep class, there would be people there from Amarillo, Wichita Falls, Northeast. They would be from Tyler, Longview, all over North Texas. And so you got an opportunity to connect with various and sundry students from in many different markets. And you yourself know, having been, an RMLO in Texas for so long, each market has got its own little idiosyncrasies and personalities. And so
you were basically indirectly recruiting for Gary Keller all across the state.
Right. Pretty much so. And, and I got an opportunity to stand in a classroom with many different, I didn't think it would last that long, but I really enjoyed doing it. And then here, 23, almost 24 years later, I'm still doing it. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things that started to interrupt you. One of the things that I've admired about you from afar, and I've kind of, and obviously, like you said, I've been in the RMLO business, but also being a father and being a coach, coaching kids. One of the things that I've admired about you, and I think I've actually learned from you, is you have a very innate ability to connect with a person where they're at, which is a very hard trait because some people get so consumed with the content of the material that they don't connect with the individual. So therefore the individual doesn't always retain or get as much out of the message because you haven't connected with them and you haven't figured out, like you said on a previous podcast, what their why is, or where their background is, or what motivates them. And so I've learned that from you. And so I think that, being an instructor for all these years, and you said like each class has its own personality. And quite honestly, some of the real estate material is just like, it's very mundane and very regimented and very boring, quite honestly. But I think that's your ability and your skill set, where you can take something that's mundane and boring and make it very relatable, and because you meet people where they are, and you also turn it into a story. So I want you to hear that firsthand, because I don't give you compliments.
Thank you.
But
It's
that also,
something that
yeah, go ahead.
it's something that I didn't know I had, literally. And then I had several people say, well, how do you keep their attention? It's because our prep classes now are 2 days, and they are 11 hours long. They go
Right.
from basically 8:30 in the morning till 6:30 in the evening, and with a lunch break and then 10-minute breaks in the meantime. But the key thing is they're sitting in a classroom for almost 11 hours. And so and you're right, some of the information about some of the real estate stuff is about as exciting as watching paint dry. You just sit there and you go, oh, okay, all right. So what you've got to do is you've got to have these little, shall we say, surprises that you interject into the material to bring it to life. Take it off the page and put it out here in the real world and say, this is why it's important for you guys to remember this, because you never know. Every single transaction has got its own personality, its own circumstances. Anything can happen at any time, and I said, so, here's the situation. You have to be adaptable, and you have to be calm, and you have to know what you are allowed to do and what you are not allowed to do. And they say, well, what do you mean by this? And I said, well, there's a lot of things that can happen between when you have the parties agree to a contract and until it gets to closing, which is when you actually get paid. And you've got to kind of nurse it, keep an eye on it, shall we say, nurture it along, because anything can happen at any time. And everybody says, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, here's the situation. Peg and I had a closing one morning that we had scheduled for, a home that was closing in our neighborhood 2 blocks away from where we were living. And then all of a sudden, I was outside with my Labrador retrievers, doing their morning business out in the backyard and enjoying the morning, having a cup of coffee at about 7 in the morning. And my phone rings, my cell phone. And it's one of the neighbors and a previous client of ours calling me, and he says, Gary, I don't know if you realize it or not, but that house that you have that Peggy signs in the yard, well, it's on fire right now. I went, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. And so it was about 2 or 3 blocks over from where we were living. I told Peg, I said, hey, Peg, the house over here, such and such, John's house is on fire. I'm going to go over there and see, if the fire department's there. Because she said, what do you mean John's house is on fire? I said, John's house is on fire. The people across the street just called and told me they called the fire department. The roof is fully engaged in flames. And she says, oh my God, that's supposed to close today at noon. So we had it under contract. The seller, who was a client of ours, had already moved out, and the buyers hadn't closed on it. It was scheduled to close. This was a Friday morning at 7 a.m., and it was on fire at, 7 o'clock in the morning. So we run over there, so forth and so on. And the fire department's there. The house is fully engaged.
Oh, wow.
They're not putting any water on the house itself because it had a wood shingle roof on it at that time.
Okay.
they're spraying all the houses around it. And I said, why aren't you trying to put the fire out? And one fire captain said, oh, that thing's gone, man. There's no way we can save that. We're just trying to save the neighborhood now. So I went,
Oh, wow.
okay. So, as
Up in
life
up in
has it,
smoke.
after they got all of the wood shingle houses around it soaked down their roof, then they started shooting. When you have a wood shingle fire, those wood shingles catch fire and they float up and they look like pieces of burning toast floating around in the air. So they're trying to shoot those down like it was a trap shoot, with fire hoses. It was
I'm sorry, I'm laughing now, but I'm visualizing this, and I know at the time you and Mom weren't laughing, but I'm laughing.
I was standing out here across the street with the neighbors who had called me, and then your mom pulls up, and then her client who owned the house pulls up, and they're just sitting there like, oh, they'd been smacked in the face because
Right.
in 4.5, 5 hours they were going to close on the house, and the new buyers were going to take possession that day. So it was one of those take possession day of closing plan. Everybody's all upset, crying and wheeling and so forth and so on. And so after about 2.5 hours, they got it put out. It didn't do all that much damage to the interior. It just took the roof completely off. I mean,
Right.
wood shingle roofs just, that's like kindling.
Up in flames. Right.
So, they got it inspected. It was still smoking. And then it occurred to me, I said, oh my gosh, so sorry about the closing, so forth, so on. And I asked her and the seller who was standing there, I said, wow, that's unfortunate. I said, hon, you remember that we have this guy who's also a home inspector by the name of Charlie, and he buys fire restoration homes. And then I looked at John and I said, John, are you still interested in selling your house? And he kind of looked at me like I just smacked him with a mackerel. He says, well, of course, but I mean, who's going to buy that? And I said, well, let me get Charlie on the phone and see if he wants to come by and take a look at it. I called him. He happened to be 10 minutes away.
Oh, wow.
And so he said, sure. I said, Charlie, I've got a smoker. And he said, where is it? So, meaning it was a fresh fire and he would be the first one to get a opportunity to look at it. He was also an insurance adjuster, so he had a pretty good idea.
Sure.
This is way back in, early 2000s. And so Charlie drives up, looks at the house, walks over, meets our client. Of course, we're having to terminate and release the current buyers, the current closing, because it's in no condition and can't be restored for any certain period of time.
Right.
And so I said, would you be interested in taking a look at this and making an offer on it? He says, absolutely. And he asked the owner what kind of insurance he had. He had replacement insurance with a very low deductible. And Charlie says, well, I may be able to make you an offer as soon as you get the other one released, because he understood the transaction process. And before the end of the day, even though we were supposed to close on Friday at noon, we had a release from the original buyer and the seller. They got their earnest money back and terminated that contract and had it under contract with a fire restoration contractor. If his insurance policy was assignable,
sure,
meaning they would assign the claim to the new buyer, and wham, we had it under contract before dark.
Oh, wow.
So here's the moral to the story, and of course I tell this story from time to time to one of my classes. The moral of the story is, no matter what the real estate business throws at you, how challenging, how impossible the circumstances may seem, if you are the calmest head in the room, you will always be able to find a solution to get out of almost anything. And so I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not going to say it's not going to be challenging.
Sure.
But panicking and freaking out and going, oh my God, what am I going to do, is not going to be the solution. Your solution probably lies within the relationships of the people you already know. It's just, do you have the demeanor and the calm, shall we say, approach to, now how can we figure this out?
Right.
Even while it's still smoking, you may be
Right.
able to sell it. And everybody always laughs about that, So the key is, and that's a real life circumstance that happens to you. I said it's also other things that will happen to you in the real estate business that you're not prepared for.
Sure.
So, and they said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, I've had several different kinds of experiences besides that. I said, no matter how hard you work, how well you have something planned, how much you want something to happen, there may be other circumstances that will be thrown in the middle of it. So you need to be prepared for that too. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? I says, well, for instance, a lot of people don't think it'll ever happen to them, but I'm telling you, you need to be prepared for it. They said, what do you mean? I said, well, while you're in the middle of a transaction, you don't want anything that would run this thing off the rails because it's already ready to go to closing. Everybody's approved. We got all the necessary documents at the title company. And then one of your clients decides to, through, divine intervention or whatever, rudely and inconsiderately suddenly die in the middle of the transaction before closing.
Has that happened before?
Okay, what do you do now?
They go, hey, it's funny you say that, and you can take this with you, but I say this all the time. The reason why it's important to have a very good realtor, and more importantly, a very good lender that have a symbiotic relationship where they talk all throughout the transaction. It's important because there's 81 different things that can prevent a house from closing. 81 different things. From the time you write a contract to the time you get the loan funded, there's 81 different things that can pop up. And so,
Exactly.
I laugh about this all the time. It's like, clients all the time want to go, well, what's the cheapest rate you can get? And what are your fees and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that's not the most important thing. Because if you don't close on time, it can cost you thousands upon thousands of dollars. And then the rate and the fees are inconsequential. And there's obviously there's a box lender, which basically sponsors every sports stadium on the planet, and they have a notorious reputation for saying one thing and doing another. And at more than one occasion, I've had to rescue deals that the clients have come to me and go, look, this is going bad quick, and here's why, and stuff like that. So my point is, I want to point out to our audience that it's important that you have a professional realtor that can think outside of the box and, like you said, has a calm demeanor and is a problem solver, and B, a lender that has a relationship or can develop a relationship quickly with the buying or the listing agent so that you can get to the finish line, because obviously the whole point of buying it is getting to the finish line. It doesn't make you can negotiate the best price, you can negotiate any repairs based on the inspection, you can do all those things. If you don't get it closed and funded, then it doesn't matter, right?
Exactly. And the one thing that happens is a lot of people think that a really great real estate agent and producer is a top salesperson. I beg to differ. And, we discovered this many, many years ago. The real estate top producing agents are the ones that have, first of all, a really good, well-defined and rigid system of developing business, maintaining business, and keeping in touch with all of their existing clients. Just because you just had a closing, blah, 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 blah. And, Gary Keller used to quote this stat way back in the early 2000s from the National Association of Realtors that said the NAR did a survey, and it, no matter how many, and they were people who had bought or sold a home using a really professional realtor, but they focused more on the buying side. And they said, basically, of all the people they surveyed, they found out that 3 to 5 years after the transaction, those people who had used a really good real estate agent 85% of them could not tell you the name of the agent that sold them their home or whether or not they were still in the business or not, because they hadn't heard anything from them.
Yep.
They just dropped them like a hot rock. They never heard back from them, so forth and so on. So we found out that the ones that are really, really, truly successful develop, not to coin a phrase from a well-known author, raging fans or advocates out of their existing clients, and develop their business from a foundation of not what's out here in the air, somebody clicking on something on an internet ad,
Magic
but
theory.
relationships based on trust of people they already knew. And so that was a solid foundation. And then you stay into the relationship of that. Well, you yourself know your mom had unbelievable discipline, and she would get up at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning every single day, and she had this list of people that she would call and leave a voicemail and sing happy birthday to them. She didn't want to actually talk to them. She wanted to get their voicemail or their answering machine. And it didn't make any difference if it was the husband, the wife, the children. The kids really, really got off on that because they said, oh, Miss Peggy called and sang happy birthday to me this morning. So that's how you build trust and relationships, by making, like you said, and motivational speakers has always said, people do not really care or pay much attention to what you say, but they will always pay attention to how you make them feel. So if they feel special, and that's what you have to do. Sometimes it's difficult, Clint, to stand in a room of 45, 50, or 60 people and make each one of them feel special, but you have to do it if you're a great communicator.
Hey, do me a favor. I think that's an extremely important point. Say that one more time. I want you to, for the audience, I want you to reiterate what you just said.
Well, I make it an effort within the first 2 or 3 hours, because you can't do it all at once.
Sure.
To at least have or make, and I don't just stand behind the podium the whole time and spew out information. I move around in the classroom. So you move out into the classroom and kind of blend yourself with the group. And I try to, at every opportunity, have eye-to-eye contact with everybody in the room.
Okay.
Multiple times, and point out certain things. And when I'm delivering a certain point or a certain important scenario about a piece of information, I will pick out 2 or 3 people throughout the classroom that I do eye-to-eye contact, and then I will ask them something after I've delivered the information. I says, does that make sense to you?
Right.
And I will ask them a question, not that I want them to go into a soliloquy or a long-winded answer, but at least get an acknowledgement that, yes, they're paying attention. Whenever you have an instructor, and you can watch, and I patterned that after motivational speakers that stood in rooms full of thousands of people, and, I have to hand off a lot of those techniques I learned from Gary Keller himself. Yeah. Because Keller is a really phenomenal communicator. Okay. But he's a better individual that wants to connect with everybody that he's talking to. And he can do it with 5 people in the room, 500 people in the room. I've seen him do it time and time again. And the really great motivational speakers and communicators are always those that connect with their audience and on some level and make everybody feel, I'm talking specifically to you. Right. Boom. And then you open the door by saying, if you have any questions about that, ask them a question. Does that make sense to you, or do you understand how that can happen? So you ask them a question, and that engages them in the actual presentation. And you'll find out, it doesn't hurt to tell a wild real estate story every once in a while, like house burning down the morning of closing, and they all look at you like, is that really going to happen? I said, it did. So anything can happen. I said, you don't know. I said, you live in the country of Texas, which has the most radical weather changes you could possibly have in the United States.
Right.
I said, we were sitting in closing, and we had both the buyer and the seller in this one closing in Richardson, Texas. And we were sitting in the title office right over there off of 75 and Campbell Road. And you remember, we used to use Kirby McCord as our closing attorney.
Sure.
And we were sitting at the closing table. And I said, this is why you want to use professionals that know the business very, very well. And the buyers had already closed. They had signed everything earlier that morning. The sellers were in the title company. We were going through the closing documents to sign. And then all of a sudden, a hailstorm hits. And this is right up there by, Canyon Creek where you used to live.
Sure.
Hailstorm hits that shopping center, starts breaking out windshields because the hailstones are about tennis ball size, and the house that we are closing on is 2 blocks away.
Oh, wow.
So what's the chance that that house is going to have hail damage from
Pretty
that
good.
storm? Kirby taught me a lesson. He kind of grabbed the closing documents and pulled them back away from the seller. And he says, well, unfortunately, it appears to be that there may be some storm damage to this property, and we don't want to get into a dispute about whose insurance company is going to be liable for it. And I had never thought of that in my whole life. But that happened, and he taught me a lesson. Let's stop this closing and decide, is the seller's insurance company going to be liable, or is the buyer's new company going to be liable? And you know how insurance companies think.
Sure.
Oh, well, you hadn't closed on it yet.
Right.
We're off the hook. So
Yeah, exactly.
And it took us about 4 or 5 days to get that resolved. But luckily, the seller's policy covered 100%, and the buyer's got a completely new roof shingle replacement because of the damage, and new gutters. And there was 2 or 3 other things that were damaged by it. That was one of those severe, instant hailstorms that
Sure.
interrupted your smooth closing day.
Right.
That happens all the time.
Yeah. Well, once again, it goes back to, and I think it's extremely important that as a realtor or a title company person or an instructor or a lender, that I think you hit the nail on the head when you said people will always remember how you made them feel. And I think that's something that's very important and sometimes forgotten too often. And look, it's easy to sit here behind a microphone and say that's important when you're not in the middle of the transaction. But I think for the audience, it's a good reminder that you need to remind yourself that, it's not what happens to you, it's how you handle it. And I've been guilty of it because I'm a very emotional person because I'm passionate about what I do and I care a lot. And so sometimes my emotions get me fired up, and I think it's a good reminder for me to say, you need to back away a little bit, take a couple of breaths, and remind remind you to continue to cater to the client and make them feel great, and that you're going to get the answer and it's going to get resolved and it'll all work out, and be, like you said, have a calming demeanor. That's also something you're very skilled at. So, one
point I want to make, Clint, about that, and this is something that your mom and I both agreed on a lot, is it's important for you to be professional. It's really, really, truly, and conduct yourself professionally and have people on your team that are professional. But where most realtors kind of drop the ball is they don't pay a whole lot of attention to the professionalism of the people involved in the transaction, the lenders, the appraisers, the inspectors, closing people. So you have to surround yourself with a team of highly professional, highly knowledgeable, and very, very, that have the same kind of calm demeanor.
Like-minded, like-hearted, and like-minded.
Bingo. Absolutely. And so what happens is, because clients Both buyers and sellers are extremely nervous. They're on edge. This is one of the biggest financial transactions they've ever done in their life. They're thinking, oh my God, we're signing the papers to commit to this huge amount of money for the next 30 years. They start thinking all kinds of lions and tigers and bears. So they need everybody around them to be reassuring, calming. That's the lender, the lender's processors, the title people, everybody.
Sure.
So it's just as important for you to build a highly professional and shall we say, disciplined team of people that you refer your clients to, lenders, inspectors, repair people, so forth, so on. And I think you've learned that too.
Yeah, and initially it's just like anything else. It's building relationships, and whether it's a client or what, like you said, is building relationships with the team of people that you surround yourself with. It takes time. So. And it's the only way to do it's through trial and error. So, if you're a newer realtor out there or a client, don't get frustrated and say the process is broken. It's not going to happen because you're going to have to weed. You're going to have to weed through some frogs to get to the fish, right? I want to touch on this because this has been a big topic in the real estate industry, especially recently. And you and I have had several discussions on this, but I want for the audience, I want to hear your perspective. Let's talk about the NAR settlement and how it affects realtors doing business, but more importantly, how does it affect clients doing, people that are trying to buy houses, relative to, what are their actual real changes, and B, how is it any different than, doing business as status quo?
Well, there's two different approaches you can take from this. It's number one, it didn't change the business all that long or all that much. What it did is it brought the mystery of real estate fees out of the dark into the light. And now we have to be, shall we say, fully transparent and fully disclose who's paying what and on whose behalf. So the NAR settlement, first of all, it shouldn't have happened anyway, and that's just my opinion. But, it is what it is, so you take the circumstances and then go with it. But it did not change basically how we do the real estate business or who pays who what. It just brought it into a fact where now we have to clarify it in writing and disclose it to all parties in the transaction in writing. So the way we handle it now, they handle it in different ways across the United States, but in Texas, what they did is they added and amended the paragraphs in the contract as well as the buyer representation agreement and the listing agreement, which is the broker representing the sellers. So now we have to denote and delineate who's paying the broker's fees, how much they're paying, and is the listing broker who is representing the seller, which traditionally has always included a fee for a buyer's broker, still going to be paying the buyer's brokerage fee, which is ultimately taken from the seller's proceeds, or are they refusing to pay the fee or passing on not paying the fee? Well, in all reality, without getting into too many antitrust violations here, it's always usually traditionally been negotiable, and it's 100% negotiable and always will be. So that hasn't changed. But what has changed is right up front, one thing that changed is we had a lot of agents out here running around working with buyers without any signed representation agreement, no buyer's reps,
Sure,
no showing agreements, nothing. So what I always call those people, and I have for the last 25 years, is stupid volunteers. Why do you call them stupid volunteers? Well, because, anybody and everybody who's ever done volunteer work, when do you get your check?
you don't.
Well, you don't. because you're doing volunteer work, but you know you're volunteering your time, your effort, your talents, and maybe even some of your monetary support. But it's to dedicate and give back to the community. So, and while you're doing this volunteer work, you're not really too afraid or at risk of being sued for anything you're saying or doing or any activities you're conducting. Well, that's a little different whenever you're working with a buyer,
Right.
a buyer customer who's not a client, who has not hired you to represent them and agreed to pay you a certain fee. Yeah, if you don't have a buyer representation agreement or a showing agreement, you're a stupid volunteer, because everything you say and do to that buyer and to the people involved in the transaction, if you mislead them in any way, steer them, or give them disinformation, you can be sued for every bit of that, even though you don't technically represent them. And so that's what I call being a really stupid volunteer, because everything you say and do, you can be held liable for in a court of law, but you're not getting paid. So how bright is that?
Hey, let me ask you a question. So why would anyone do that?
Well, they do it all the time, or did it for many, many years.
Yeah.
So, but, and the reason and the excuse they gave me, well, I just haven't gotten around to asking them, or I'm afraid they'll say no, or, they refuse to sign it because they don't want to commit to any one particular broker and so forth
Sure.
and so on. I said, okay, well, that's fine. Then I said, do you have to work with them if they refuse to hire you? Well, no, but they're a really good buyer prospect and this, that, and the other thing. Then I said, then let's go back and look at where we're off track. When should you explain to them how a real estate transaction really is done, no matter where they're from, how many houses they bought or sold, so forth, so on? Maybe this is the first time they've ever bought a property in the country of Texas, and we have some laws that are different than everywhere else out in those foreign countries outside of our borders. Now, I call it the country of Texas because that's really truly what it is. We have so many unique laws that you don't find anywhere else in the United States, one being intermediary instead of dual agency, and all the other agents coming from everywhere else. What the heck is all that? What's this interloper stuff? And I said, no, it's intermediary, not interloper. You're the interloper until you become actively licensed and legal here in the country of Texas. The key thing is we have to explain that to our clients. When? In the middle or in the end of the transaction? No, in the beginning.
That's fine.
Because we're required by law, upon first face-to-face meeting or exchange of substantive information about real estate, give them a one-page document that explains our laws of agency and who they choose to represent them or not represent them. It's called the Information About Brokerage Services form, and Texas is the only state that has it. So you have to give it to them at first opportunity. Heck, they mandate it. It'd be tagged onto our emails.
So hey, so real quick,
And
so that,
this,
so hold on. So let me interrupt you for a second. So is that completely different than the buyer's rep agreement?
yes,
So it's a form in addition to.
yes.
Okay.
And this IABS form, they can
Is
acknowledge
that
it.
new, or is that new, or has that always been a part of the?
No, that's been a part of our system since 1996, believe it or not.
Wow.
But
Well,
most agents never do it.
okay, so the interesting part about that is, obviously, I've been in the mortgage business since 98, 97. This is the first I've ever heard of this. So
I know. It's because we as real estate practitioners are exceptionally bad about doing what is really mandated by law. And we have to do this. We have to do it. It doesn't obligate the people to us in any way. It's just informing them of how we practice business and do the real estate representation business in the state of Texas. And hey, that's been in effect since 1996.
So-
whenever they changed, the laws for buyer representation and seller representation, and you had to have a separate representation agreement if you were working with them. So I tell everybody, even though these people want to go look at houses and so forth and so on, then you have to basically have a conversation with them, whether it be at an open house, over the phone, Zoom call. They walked into your office. It doesn't make any difference. And say, before we go look at some properties, first things first, basically, and I tell them you started off with a question. When was the last time you bought or sold a home in the state of Texas?
5 years ago.
And everybody knows, well, this is my first one, or we bought one 25 years ago. I said, well, you may not be aware that there are certain laws and requirements for us to disclose how we practice real estate agency and brokerage in the state of Texas. Would you be offended if I gave you a one-page form just for your information? It doesn't obligate you to me or my broker. It's just required by the state of Texas. You be informed that this is how we do it here. And of course, nobody's ever offended by that. Then you go over and explain it to them and they say, so whether you're there for a listing appointment or you're showing new buyers, it approaches both. And it explains in a very brief, kind of legalese, cold fashion, how we practice representation in the state of Texas. So as you see, you will have a choice. And I go this back into the client. I said, as you see, you will have a choice about who you work with. And quite honestly, how they are bound by law to represent you. So you understand that in our ensuing conversations, you may make certain disclosures or share such confidentiality or confidential information about why you're moving or this, that, and the other thing, or even confidential financial information. Unless you hire me to represent you while we're looking for your home, that confidential information is not guarded by any kind of fiduciary relationship. And we have the same kind of relationship that you would have with an attorney. Once you share something with us, we have to keep it confidential for the rest of our lives.
Wow.
Only if you hire us. Other than that, then it's just conversation out here. So what we do is typically we will start out by showing you homes, finding out what is your comfort zone, what you're pre-approved or pre-qualified for. Oh, by the way, have you been pre-approved by a lender in Texas? None of them have normally. They said we may want to start there before we start looking at houses, because I don't want to be out here showing you Lexus and Tesla models when all you can afford is a Toyota Celica.
Right.
That's not the same thing. And
Sure.
They all kind of chuckle about that. They say, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. And so we get that pre-qual or pre-approval out of the way right up front. Then I said, okay, so now before we get into this, my broker would prefer, all people who work with us to be our clients, so we are under confidentiality. Now, this is our buyer rep agreement, and this will hire us to be your exclusive representative in searching for a home. Now, I want you to understand one thing. This does not bind you to me forever. What it is this is a employment contract where I'm an independent contractor of yours. Mm-hmm. And if you're not happy with the services or the information I'm providing, you can fire me at any time. But you also don't have to hire me for a long duration of time. It's not like we're getting married.
Sure.
We're just going into a business relationship. And you can hire me for 1 day, 1 week, one particular address if you want to.
Sure.
And maintain your independence if that's what you prefer. The one reason that most buyers are hesitant to sign the buyer representation agreement is they think it binds them to that broker and that agent forever. And that's not the case.
Makes sense.
You understand that.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Dad. So why would a buyer's agent not explain that?
Because they don't know how to, Clint. And it's because, and I think this is where most brokers fall down, is, they have training classes, education, this, that, and the other thing. but they don't take the time to sit down and bore down into what is the core reason that most buyers and sellers are hesitant to get into a relationship with a broker or an agent. It's because the agent and the broker don't do a real good job of explaining what is their role.
Sure.
What is their position? What can they do? What can they not do?
So the realtor hasn't been trained well enough to be able to.
Absolutely. It all goes down to training.
Sure.
And it's kind of like everybody asks me all the time, says, well, how do you come up with all this stuff? And I says, well, it doesn't come naturally. You have to practice it.
Sure.
And you have to practice it again and again and again and again. These are what we call, scripts that you practice so well that they sound completely natural when they're coming out of you, and they don't sound like they're canned. Nobody hears that. And I said, well, give us an example of what are you talking about? And I said, well, technically, the information about brokerage services form doesn't have to be presented to everybody coming into or out of an open house. But the laws of Texas require us as agents to disclose if we are representing someone, our representation at first contact of any kind, face-to-face, over the phone, verbal is fine. It doesn't have to be done in writing. And everybody says, well, okay, so what do you mean by that? And I said, okay, let's say you're at an open house, okay? It's your listing. You're holding it open, on a nice sunny Sunday afternoon, and 2 or 3 couples come into the house, but they walk into the house. So what do? You naturally, you have the house stage, you have flyers. You pick up some flyers, walk towards the people as they're coming in the front door, greet them, something like this. Hi, how are you? Welcome to our open house. It's a beautiful day out here. Thank you for stopping by. My name's Gary Richey. I'm the listing agent. I work for the sellers, and I know more about the house than just about any other agent. So here's a flyer. If you have any questions about the home, the neighborhood, anything else in this area, please feel free to ask me. And that very simple greeting, what did I just do? First of all, I notified them who I worked for.
Sure.
Who you represent the seller. That's disclosure of representation, which is required by law at first contact. And then, you may continue on the conversation as the people are walking through the house. Some people are more, shall we say, open and sharing than others, of course, because they're kind of afraid of realtors. Well, don't get too close to that one. They may bite you. Or if they get their claws into you, they'll never turn you loose. So just give them their space, but be with them. Don't turn them loose to wander through the house occupied where all kinds of personal effects are out.
Sure.
The key thing is while you're talking to them, I also ask them a few questions. I said, so have this is the first time that you've been in this neighborhood? Yeah. Yeah, we just found it. We saw the sign, so forth and so on. Are you currently working with a real estate agent here in Texas? And that's finding out who they're working with. Well, if they say no, not anyone in particular, I said, okay, that's great, so forth and so on. If you have any questions, there's some laws in the state of Texas that are a little different than where you may be coming from. So feel free to ask me. I've got some additional information. I've got the information about brokerage services forms there in case they are not represented. If they do acknowledge, yes, well, we've been working with this one particular agent we really like, and I said, oh, wow, who is it? I may know who they are. Maybe we've done some transactions together. A lot of times I recognize, and a lot of times I don't. It doesn't matter. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to engage them and let them know that, you've been around for a while. You know several people in the business. And if you make a connection, and if you do recognize who they are, oh, yeah, I know they work for XYZ broker. Yeah, they're one of the top producers in the industry and really well-seasoned great agent. You've got a great representation there. And so what you're doing is you're affirming their judgment by complimenting their agent. And you're also developing a link to where when it comes down to this house versus that house, well, you remember that guy that we met at that open house? It was really nice. It knew, and usually they'll tell the agent who it is, and if the agent does know you, oh yeah, I know. I've done several transactions with their agency. Then what you're doing is you're kind of tilting the balance of the scale of working with somebody we're familiar with versus somebody we don't know at all.
Sure.
So that's building trust on a two-way level. And you do that with every agent you work with too. I tell agents, I said, it's ridiculous to get into a combative conversation with another real estate agent. You know, no matter how upset they may be or this, that, and the other thing, you want to always maintain the same demeanor and same cooperative attitude, not get testy,
Sure.
not challenge their knowledge or their brokerage or anything like that, because we're all in this business together. It's a cooperative business, hopefully, not a combative business. But some agents seem to think it's, like, watching the TV war of the weekends or playing,
Sure.
video games where you try to kill as many of your opposing agents as possible. So you know what I'm talking about, Clint. You run into them all the time.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So obviously, aside from that being sage advice, so really the only difference with the NAR settlement now, because I run across this all the time with different agents, is they're fearful and how's it going to hurt our business, and our seller's going to choose not to pay a commission for a buyer. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, is it really doing anything differently than what agents should have been doing in the beginning, and more importantly, what the professional agents have already been doing this whole time?
Oh, yeah.
Is this settlement doing anything differently?
No. The only thing that it really truly changed, you want to know the big thing that the NAR settlement truly changed? The one big thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't advertise the broker's commission in the MLS anymore. Boom. Period. That's it. Bottom line.
And is that gonna be a deal killer and crater the real estate industry?
What happens is this. Here's the crux of the matter. You just can't advertise if the listing broker is going to be paying the buyer's broker a commission in the MLS. But you can advertise it on your own website. Okay. You can confirm it verbally or in writing through other advertising media. Now, you need to have your broker qualify that and make sure you're not stepping close to a line to where if an MLS or an advertising medium picks it up and advertise it, then you're going to be in violation of the NAR regulations. But the bottom line is, it didn't change how we do the real estate business at all, other than you just can't advertise your commission or whether or not a broker is sharing a commission with another broker in the MLS. In the public or the private comments of the MLS. That's it. But now
this goes back to what you've touched on earlier, where it's the agents that are freaking out about this, that say it's going to crater the business or they're going to get out of the business. Part of it is they're either lazy or they weren't educated well enough by their broker of how this impacted their business and what they needed to do to comply. And
I've been through this before. It's no that what the really big dynamic change was when we invoked intermediary, and Senate Bill 489, which was passed in 1995, went into effect January of 1996. That was where we now have our current agency and buyer versus seller or landlord versus tenant representation, to where basically a tenant or a landlord or a buyer or a seller can hire their own broker to represent their best interests. Now, it's up to the brokers still, and always has been, to negotiate who pays who what commission. It's just never been clearly stated in writing by an agency employment contract, and now it is. So here's the situation. A lot of people don't take the time to read the documents that they're signing. So I always make a point to explain. And this has been coming up on listing presentations as well as buyer rep meetings. And here's the situation. I tell people very carefully now, I have to be careful how I explain this because I don't want to violate any rules, regulations, or confidentiality. But here's what happens. Whenever we are signing somebody up to a buyer representation agreement and it said that, the buyer has agreed to pay the broker a XYZ fee, and it's either a percentage or a dollar amount for representing them and this, that, and the other thing. But they forget to read further. It says the buyer will first to seek part of this compensation from the seller or seller's broker. And so I say, most of the time, and I say, well, basically, I've been in the real estate business for a lot of years. And in my 46 years, I've never had a buyer pay me a dime to represent them. I've always negotiated it and got compensated through the seller's broker. We have a separate agreement. Now that separate agreement is taken out of the back and injected into the transaction. So we have to fully disclose. Now we do have to disclose, and it's called a, disclosure of brokerage services. Mm-hmm. That's part of the transaction now. That is a one-page document that shows who is paying who, how much, and where it's coming from. And that has to be signed by both brokers or broker associates or the agents and the buyers and the sellers. It becomes part of the transaction now. So now it's no longer a mystery who's paying whose fee.
Sure.
And because it clearly states it right there in that one disclosure document. So that becomes part of the transaction that is shared as part of the contract negotiation process. That's another change. Well, we should have been doing that all along anyway.
Right.
But now it's required by law in the state of Texas that we have to fully disclose if the selling broker is paying the buying brokers, or basically if the listing broker is paying part of the showing broker's commission, or all of it.
Sure.
And everybody has to acknowledge and how much it is. So that's one different. But hey, here's the reality. I went on a listing appointment with one of my newbies, and they asked me, first question, well, I hear we don't have to pay, the full XYZ percent because now the buyers have to pay their showing brokers. And I said, yeah, well, there's a lot of information, and that could be the case, but here's what I'm going to tell you. In all reality, the way that we've traditionally done the real estate business is that the brokers work out who's compensating who, kind of behind the scenes. Now it's out here in front. And here's what has been transpiring. Now, you can't refuse to show a property based on the amount of compensation. That's against the law. But let's say that you have a seller who is not going to pay part of the commission for a buyer's broker. So that seller right up front tells the agent, no, I'm not going to pay any of the buyer's agent fees at all. They're just going to have to compensate their own guy. I said, okay, so that's your stance and that's the position you want to take. I said, do I have your authority to share that with any inquiring brokers whenever they call and ask questions about the listing? And I said, of course. And this is what we have traditionally done, is now what we do before we start showing a bunch of houses, we call the listing agent or listing brokers. And it's not illegal for us to ask, are your sellers going to help compensate or pay part of the buyer broker fees? And how much? You can ask them individually. And they'll say yes or no. Then what I am put in a position of doing as a buyer's representation broker is saying, okay, I've got a list of these 5 houses that you wanted to see. These 4 right here, the seller is willing to help compensate and pay, your buyer's broker's fee. This one here is not. They're not going to pay anything. So that means if you want to make an offer or buy this particular property, we need to go back and look at what our buyer representation agreement says, because you may have to pay me and my broker a separate fee other than that selling broker compensating us for part of it. So it's up to you. Which houses do you want to look at? And that's what I say. Guess what? They'll throw this one away.
Yeah, 100%.
And they'll look at the other ones. And so I tell that to the seller when I'm at the listing appointment. And I said, wouldn't you do the same thing? And he says, well, of course. I said, so do you want to offer to pay some of the buyer broker commission? You don't have to pay it all. It's still negotiable. Or do you think that it's going to give you a little bit of an advantage by compensating the buyer's agency brokers rather than those that are not compensating it? Every single time, Clint, guess what happens?
Yeah, they
The
change
listing people say, well, yeah, we'll pay whatever, we negotiate, what's typical or what's it. I said, well, it's up to you, but, and then we'll quote dollars or percentages or whatever. It's not a hard conversation to have.
No, absolutely.
If you know what to say.
100%. 100%. And that's why
Does it
they
make
come.
perfectly sense the way I explained it to you?
100%. That's what, and the irony, and then that's why they come to, well, they don't know this up front, but that's the type of education they get with Gary Richey when they go to Champion School of Real Estate. Not only do they get the law, but they get a way to explain it so that they can get the point across, and it benefits them and their clients. And so,
sure, it's common sense, and you don't see a whole lot of common sense anywhere nowadays. But if you use common sense, and it all goes back to how would you feel if you were sitting in their chair?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
And you have to be able to communicate with them about that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, and the irony is I've had several agents on prior to, you coming on and explaining this in great detail, which I appreciate you doing so. And, because we typically have the most, some of the most successful agents in our industry on the podcast. They're really not fearful of the whole NAR settlement. And in fact, they're actually welcoming it because it's going to provide the professionals more market share in the industry, and it's going to weed out the people that thought it's just a great idea, as you like to say, just to pop on and be a part-time agent and make some some quick bucks. So it's actually going to what's the word I'm looking for? Substantiate or validate or legitimize the industry a little bit because of what you need to do and the education that goes along with it. So appreciate you sharing some light on that. So let's talk about this real quick. So, you talked about when, you and Mom opened up the market share, the office. Talk about what the thought process was, why you wanted to do that, kind of what transpired, and what inevitably ended up you guys, shutting it down, and kind of what your thoughts, and your 5,000 foot perspective of now that it's over, why an agent would want to or why an agent wouldn't want to open up a market center.
Okay. Well, we did it because we were, in that, shall we say, feverish growth curve mindset of late 99, early 2000, 2001. And we launched that market center in early 2000. And, in retrospect, and, I sat down and had a conversation with the owners as well as the team leaders of Dallas Preston Road, which was at Preston and Frankfurt, which wasn't that far away from Coit and Campbell.
No.
It was less than 3 miles. In retrospect, it wasn't a wise decision to locate it that close. Market centers have a tendency to dominate a certain market area. Like, offices, they have office share. And whether people want to realize it or not, is that if you have them overlapping or too close to each other, then they are recruiting the same agents in the same market area and doing business in the same sales region. So
Sure.
in retrospect, we should have probably selected a location further away from the Dallas Preston Road Market Center, because it was kind of like what we call the mothership.
Sure.
It spawned about 12 other real estate market centers out of it, and the top producing agents may have started at Dallas Preston Road, or at least did a stint in the real estate business there. Meaning, the owners of the Plano Market Center came from Dallas Preston Road. It's Mike Brody, Dick Dillingham, and a few other individuals that started the Plano Market Center, which was a huge market center. The Frisco Market Center, Jan Richey, Tom Lamphere, 2 or 3 other agents became the owners and operating principals of Frisco. Same thing with, some of the other market centers, Keller Williams Central, which was opened up after we closed the Richardson Market Center. But what was happening is, there are a lot of reasons to open and have an office, and even more reasons not to. We made a mistake in our location selection. Hey, you live currently not, 3 blocks from where that office location used to be.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very good, high traffic, high profile location. We had a lot of success. We had as many as 155 agents in that office at one time. But what we wanted to do is expand the Keller Williams brand as quickly and rapidly as we could. But sometimes you need to do a little bit more due diligence and research and look at the impact that even your competitive offices are going to have on your business, your ability to recruit real estate agents that are productivity specific, full-time and part-time. I can't tell you not to recruit part-time agents, because some of the best agents we had started out part-time.
Sure.
But, then you have to provide a learning specific and educational nucleus there for them to come to, and always seek additional knowledge and training. So you've got to have that. We had plenty of that. But then ultimately found out that, economically, it wasn't feasible to be that close to another major market center. So that was one of the reasons. Another thing was your mom's health. It was deteriorating quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I was, called to do other duties besides, focus on that one market center. I became the productivity coach at Dallas Preston Road, and, did several things there, as well as being an instructor at Champions. And, and I still had my construction and remodeling business at the same time. So, I had a lot of irons in the fire. So I learned a very valuable lesson.
So the market center was from when to when? We opened it when, and we ended up...
We started it and bought the initial franchise and did all the proprietary legwork in 1999. And we found a location in early 2000, late 1999, early 2000. We negotiated the lease with the owners of that area, and then it was a raw space, so we had to do the finish out.
Right, I remember that.
So we did the finish out completion on that, which I used part of my construction company as well as other subcontractors I knew very, very well, so that we could get it done faster, cheaper, better. But we really honestly launched it in mid-2000, and it was open from 2000 until I don't know exactly when Peg made the decision to close it down, but it was somewhere around 2006 or 7.
Okay.
The market shift at that time was part of the deal too.
Yeah.
You know what happened in 2007?
The great mortgage crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
So So looking back on it, probably not something that you would do again, right?
Excuse me, I didn't hear what your
I
question
said,
was.
looking back on it, probably not something you would do again.
I would, in retrospect, I don't regret doing it. I would just probably do a lot more due diligence and research and do it in a different way.
Okay. All right.
I would, in fact, the situation is a lot of people don't realize how restricting and demanding owning a real estate office is. Besides all the legalities and all this, that, and the other thing, so forth and so on, it demands a lot of one-on-one personal time to make it work.
Sure.
To make it successful. And if you, as the owner of the office, can't do it, then you better hire somebody that will act like an owner, that will do it in your place.
Sure.
And so then the leadership team, the team leaders, all of the staff that is there, they all have to be on the same page. And what made Dallas Preston Road so successful was they had probably the best of the best in the industry in our area, all at the same place at the same time, which was very rare.
Sure.
And we all had a shared vision and goal. Our office owner, which was David Osborne, was not really all that involved. In fact, we kind of said, okay, David, fine. Actually, we kind of kept him separate from the operation because sometimes owners have a tendency to come from a different perspective than the actual core leadership team. The core leadership team, we all had a shared vision. We had meetings, and I mean fun meetings, not boring meetings, but we had staff meetings, at least 2 or 3 of them a week. Then we had one-on-one consulting with each other, and we all have egos, but in this particular group of people, it was a situation where we had a shared ego with a shared goal, a shared vision, what we needed to do. Each one of us knew our job specifically, and we did that to the best of our ability. And then it was just one of those perfect storms to where, it's still kind of is mind-boggling that, in fact, Gary Keller and at that time Mark Willis, who's now the new CEO of KW, was a VP or a regional director back then in Austin. They said, how did you add that many agents in that short a period of time? And they asked us, they brought us in and interviewed us all and this, that, and this. And then they started developing, a system to where all market centers would do the same thing. They'd have regular staff meetings. They'd have
they were asking specifically about. They were asking you about your specific market center or Dallas Preston Road.
Dallas Preston Road.
Okay.
And we had that kind of a dynamic that, nobody else could compete with us. I mean, yeah, it was tough to grow a market center within a 5 or 6 or even an 8-mile radius of that market center because we were so dominant over that whole market area.
Sure.
Had dominating agents, top producing agents, but we had a education system, an education team, and this is before Keller Williams had all the education it has right now.
Yeah, but it sounds like
didn't have any computerized systems. No
it
database.
sounds like you shot yourself in the foot because you helped you helped create the education system to get the agents to be productive ASAP, and then you were recruiting against the animal that you helped create.
Yeah, absolutely. So the key thing
it sounds like the other thing is what they always say in real estate. It sounded like it's all about location, and we didn't pick a very good location. So, we're running out. We're kind of butting up against some time here, but I want to get two really good questions in before I let you run because I know you're busy and I know you got things you got to do. For agents out there, because of all the hundreds of now it's thousands of people that you've coached and mentored.
Mm-hmm.
What are the 2 things that you would tell an agent or even 100% 100% commission salesperson, what are the
Sure.
two most important things that they need to be able to do to be successful in any industry? Real
Okay.
estate, mortgages, selling cars,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case may be. What are the two things that you've had
Well,
the
the big problem,
opportunity to
the
learn?
big thing, and I tell this to my new students at Champions all the time. In fact, you know, Rita Santa Maria and her family were very, very far reaching and still own that thing. They developed a list of questions for new agents to ask brokers whenever they're interviewing or selecting a broker. And it's a list of about 45 or 50 different questions. They're all really good information because getting into an industry you don't know anything about, you don't know what questions to ask. And so what we did is we came up with these questions. And then I tell these newbies, quite honestly, I said, whenever you go in and interview with a broker, okay, and I do it in kind of a, shall we say, a one sentence quick question, and a lot of them will kind of do a double take on me. And I said, listen to what this is. And I said, when you sit down and you're talking to your broker, you say, Mr. or Mrs. Broker, I need one thing before we get too deeply into this. It's concerning compensation. So I'm going to ask you, what do you get and what do I get? But more importantly, what do I get for what you get? And they all say, okay, so what? Say that again. I said, what do you get and what do I get? Meaning broker, agent split.
100%.
But more importantly, what do I get for what you get? Meaning, are you going to support me? Are you going to train me? Are you going to teach me? Are you going to have a one-on-one mentorship program to teach me all the nuances of the industry that they don't put in books? What kind of support system are you going to have? I said, all of that matters. I said, the first part of the question, what do you get and what do I get, is the real estate commission split. Hey, even if they're going to give you 100% of nothing is still nothing.
100%.
And right now, you know nothing. So the second part is the most important part. What do I get for what you get? Meaning, what do I get? What kind of support? What kind of education? What kind of systems? Will you teach me the business? Will you teach me how to generate my own leads? Or do I have to wait here like a chirping baby bird in a nest waiting for you to hand me the worm?
Sure.
And they all kind of say, well, yeah. And I said, and so everybody said, well, I want to go with a broker that gives me leads. I said, okay, leads. Define lead. Well, first of all, they don't know what a lead is. They just heard the word lead. I said, here's what a lead is. And you've got to be able to qualify them pretty damn quick or you're going to waste a lot of time and spend a lot of money. There's basically four kinds of lead. There's A buyers, D buyers, C buyers, and then D. Okay? So let's talk about these. Have I told you this before, Clint?
No,
this is
I've
the
never heard
qualifier
it.
right up front.
No, I've never heard
And
it.
I said, you have to have a broker that'll teach you the difference and where you want to focus your activities. So if you have an A buyer, you have somebody who's ready, willing, and able to go look at and can pull the trigger and write a contract on a house today. That means somebody who, A, has been pre-approved by a lender, not pre-qualified. That's different. Pre-approved. And now all they're waiting is a what? Contract of sale to attach to that loan that they've already been pre-approved for. Now, there's 2 or 3 things that still have to be done that are related to that house before you have a solid mortgage lending transaction. But they have already got the money. They know what they want. They know where they want. And they can pull the trigger and write a contract on a house. They don't have another house to sell. They don't have this. They don't have that. They don't really know what they can afford. So that's a B buyer. Someone who might be ready and willing, but not able yet because they haven't been pre-approved. They may have to, liquidate some assets or sell the house that they're in before they can go buy one. And then you got a C buyer. C buyers I kind of call them, they use this term in auto sales, tire kickers. They really would like to buy a house, but they really don't know where to start, what they can afford, and they haven't talked to anybody about how much they can qualify for. So you don't spend a whole lot of time on C's. And then D buyers, we see more D buyers than anyone else, and I call D buyers dreamers. They would love to own a house, but their credit score is in the 500s. They don't have a steady income that's verifiable. They've got 2 or 3 side businesses that may or may not be legal.
Yeah. They don't claim on their income taxes?
Bingo. Yeah. Income taxes. No, I haven't filed those in the last 6 years. I don't know what those are.
Yeah.
So what is the chances that they're ever going to be an owner? Probably nothing. They're dreamers.
Sure.
Don't spend any time with dreamers. Kind of nurture the C buyers along and introduce them to some of your team members, like your lenders and people like that, credit repair people. The B buyers, you stay a little bit more focused on, but you only work and put people who are A's in your car. Why? Because everybody else is a waste of your resources.
Right.
And that's something a lot of agents don't think about. They don't know. A lot of brokers don't even teach them that.
That's sage advice.
You want to work with anybody. I said, no. You don't want to work with anybody. You got to determine if they're an A, B, C, or a D.
Wow. That's brilliant. I mean,
makes sense.
It makes perfect sense.
And that's why most agents fail, is because they don't know the basics.
Wow.
You played sports your whole life. If you didn't learn the basics of
fundamentals,
baseball,
fundamentals and
football,
technique,
what was the first thing that your coaches taught you when you were a little bitty guy? Basics.
Yeah.
How to swing a bat, how to throw a ball, how to run,
right?
How to throw a block, how to not get hurt.
So
this is where we fall down in the real estate education industry, is we don't teach them the basics and how to do it. So that's where most companies succeed, because they got a better education system. It's not about how many leads they're going to generate. Hey, it doesn't make any difference how many leads you've got if you don't know how to qualify.
Sure.
Does it?
Perfect.
And which ones to work with.
And maybe that's part of the reason that Keller Williams has been so successful over the years, is because I guess they put a huge amount of focus and emphasis on training and coaching and educating relative to other brokerage shops in the industry.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair? Is that a fair statement?
Yep. That would be what is total focus is. So let's kind of summarize the whole thing of what people think the real estate business is. They think it's real estate sales. It's not. You don't sell anybody anything they don't want. Houses sell themselves, and nobody can convince somebody to buy a completely ugly house if they just don't like it.
Sure.
So sales has nothing to do with it. It's really actual education of the client, whether it be the buyer, the seller, the landlord, or the tenant, and then walking them through a really complicated legal commitment that may or may not have a very definitive impact on their future, whether they enjoy their future or they're miserable. So you're really a real estate acquisition consultant and teacher.
Educator.
Period.
Yeah.
You don't sell anything.
Sure.
That's what makes the great agents great, is because they never sell anything. They just explain how this can happen, that's going to happen, how you can acquire this, are you going to be comfortable in the event of that.
Right.
So they take the good, the bad, and the ugly and put it out there on the table, and we talk about what are you willing to live with.
Yeah. They educate folks that they've developed a relationship with, so folks trust them. So makes perfect sense. All right, so last question. So as of today, November 1st, 2024,
Halloweeny.
You are
last time.
Yeah, you are 74 years young. What is what's the future look like for Gary Richey?
What's the future look like for me?
Yeah.
Well, I think I kind of selected my future a few years ago, and, decided that I wasn't going to do anything I didn't like. I wasn't going to, and, there's a lot of things that I still like, I still love that I may physically, due to my health or my, advanced age, probably not a good idea to do.
Right.
So I have kind of like put those over to the side.
Sure.
But does it mean that I still don't know and love a lot about them? But the one thing that I'm probably always physically going to do is going to be probably in real estate education. Because, as long as I can talk,
sure,
as long as I can hold the attention in 1 or 2 or 30 people, I'm going to continue to share what I know. Because why would, I use this phrase a lot, and you know what I'm going to say, why would the real estate gods challenge me so many different ways and so many different fashions and so many different decades? I started looking at 1978 to where I am right now. 46 years is a long time.
Yes,
and
it is.
Especially a long time to be in the same business.
Sure.
And still be alive.
Right.
So there's a reason that I have made this journey, and now it's time for me to share that with all the people that basically are interested in hearing it. And so that's what I'm continuing to do.
Yeah.
That's why I'm going to be doing these podcasts with you, is because even though you have known me your whole life, I've been a part of your whole life. There's so much about my life that you don't know, you never realized, because
Sure.
I never really shared it.
Right.
Maybe because of, I don't want to call it modesty, but maybe because I am hesitant to toot my own horn.
Sure.
Or blow my own whistle, because I'm more important to the industry doing what I'm doing.
Sure. No, absolutely.
I'm not the kind of guy that wants to get up on the stage with 10,000 people cheering and yelling and so forth. That's not me. I'm the kind of guy that's shall we say, when you go to a concert, there would be no concert without the roadies and the concert manager.
100%.
Who puts it together, who puts it up, who tears it down, packs it up, and moves it on. I'm that guy.
Yeah.
I'm happy being that guy because I think that's my role.
Sure.
Because there would be no superstars out there if there weren't old guys like me in the background.
Sure.
Because one thing that I've learned about super high profile, high producing agents, they have a huge ego, but it's also fragile.
Right.
And they need a personal coach or a mentor or someone
constant
who will
reaffirmation.
Keep them in line.
Yeah. Constant.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, 100%.
So, because you know a lot of top producing agents and how they are structured.
Sure.
So I'm kind of like that old support guy in the back, so what do I do with this and what do I do with that?
Well, it goes back to, what the cliches that I like to say all the time, which cliches are cliches for a reason because they happen more times than not, which is if you're really good at something that you're really as good as you think you are, you don't have to talk about it or brag about it because someone's going to do it for you. Sure. And the fact that I've, heard just me, my person, like when they find out that you're my dad, so many different people, like I said, have said, man, if it wasn't for your dad, I don't know where I'd be. I wouldn't be in the industry. I would have never been successful. I would have failed. And your dad went out of his way to, give up his valuable time to help me and mentor me and basically hold my hand. And, I've heard that story so many times. And, like I said, I don't tell you all the time, but yeah, it's truly, aside from you being my dad and I love you,
yeah,
you are a true pioneer of this industry. And I don't say that lightly, pioneer and historian. That was why it was important for me to get you on this podcast and share some of your stories and some of your experiences for, not only the consumers, but more importantly for the agents out there that are looking for, direction, and that, if they just do certain fundamentals and certain basics and have certain techniques, that they're going to be successful. So thank you once again a million times for being on the podcast. Before I let you run, anything that I should have asked you that you wanted to get to this time that we didn't get to that? Anything that
Gosh, I don't know, other than, one thing that if this podcast reaches a certain type of audience, here's the situation and I learned something brand new last night. Always be open and receptive. Never have the attitude that you know everything or I got this or this, that, and that's basically ego.
sure,
What you've got to do is you've got to be an open and receptive recipient of this vast industry we call the real estate business, made up of so many different components, so many different dynamics, and it's always constantly changing. I didn't expect when I first got into it to see such a radical dynamic and change in the industry based on outside forces we have no control over.
sure,
So if we have no control over something, we have two choices. We can either get frustrated, get mad, bow up like a toad sitting on a stump,
right,
and puff up
right,
and just sit there and watch the world go by without us, or we can adapt, find out what's causing this and what's a possible solution. How's the best way to get around it? Right now, we're going through a market pricing shift again,
sure,
where the market's slowing down, interest rates are higher, people's enthusiasm to get into the real estate business is somewhat kind of waned. It's cooled off a little bit. So how do we make our properties more desirable? It's not always based on price. It can be other things too.
sure.
So what we do is we get together with all of our real estate partner team, like our lenders,
So being open-minded.
our remodelers, our contractors, and so forth and so on, and say, okay, so if we want to be the prettiest princess at the prom, we're going to have to do some things. Okay?
Yeah.
We're going to have to do some things to the house. We're going to have to dress her up, change her makeup, maybe go on a weight loss program, so we can fit into that pretty little prom dress.
Right.
Whatever you have to do, be willing to make that adaptation, or else, you know what? You might as well go get a job.
Sure. Yeah. Who wants to do that, right?
If you'll never be bored in this business, I'll guarantee you that.
Right. Well, hey, Dad, I appreciate it, man. You've been awesome. And folks out there, if you want to learn more about the real estate industry, you want to hear some sage advice, you want to learn about the history of real estate and the history of Keller Williams, you're going to want to tune into the Richey Mortgage Team Real Estate Podcast. The information is going to be below. And if you need someone to mentor you, Dad, how do they get a hold of you? If someone out there is
basically
looking,
all they need to do is they need to either call me. I'll give them my cell phone number, which is in South Texas right now. I currently live just north of San Antonio in this kind of little known place called New Braunfels.
right?
So this, which basically we're coming up to Worst Fest again, which, if you're German, you know what that means.
Yes.
My cell phone number is 830-387-9405. You can call me, you can text me. Now, I won't answer your call if I'm in a class. I'll get back to you with a text on a break. But most of the time, I'm standing in a room full of people teaching them something. My email address is spelled out my name, Gary, Gary, D as in Don, Richey, Richey, all lowercase, at kw.com.
Perfect.
So send me an email. And I'm affiliated with the Keller Williams office in San Antonio, Keller Williams City View, and we have about 1,600 agents right now in 5 different market centers in South Texas, and we can help you just about anywhere.
And that's with the broker, the great smoker broker, right? Robert Mesh.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, my group is SWR Group, who's another
Small world.
licensed instructor that teaches in Dallas, Fort Worth, Robert Mesh, and he's called the Smoker Broker. And that's not because he smokes a lot of cigars, because he's a barbecue pit master and has won several different state and international competitions.
He is, man.
That's his passion.
Good.
Do what's fun.
Well, good. Well, folks, hey, once again, if you want to learn more about the industry, you need some mentorship, you're looking for a great broker to hang your license with, my dad gave you the information. If you want to continue to hear more great real estate content, like, subscribe, push the button to the Richey Mortgage Team Real Estate Podcast. And once again, Dad, I appreciate your time, and
Sure.
we will see you guys on the next one.